Okay.
There we go.
This time.
Thank you. Okay. There we go. And I think I'm going to put it on speaker view, which means if you guys speak up, you will be on the main screen, but otherwise not. Okay. So, and why am I not getting more of this? There we go. Greetings. I'm Bob Heilbrunner, and this is class 7 of a OLLI class that's called Belonging to Each Other and the Planet. And this is class 7, and we're going to be talking about fascism and its causes and its cures. And we are recording thanks to my supporters here. The overall context of the class is to say that we are living in a paradigm of narcissism, and which has been being defined in the course of the class, and that that system is cultural, economic, personal, psychological. That system, which is a manifest in a nested concentric circles of spheres of our lives, and touches us in various ways. That is running its course and not sustainable, as is apparent from both political, economic, human, environmental, species, and spiritual crisis that our species is in on this planet at this time. And that what needs to happen, so that's, and that the narcissistic system is sort of defined as a system that sees the world as a contest of conflicting, incompatible interests, and a fight for domination among them in each of those spheres. Wherever there's a polarity involved, you take sides and you fight for the victory of the side you choose and for the destruction of the side you don't choose. And that needs to transform into a system that recognizes the interdependency and the connectedness and the communion of things that is the foundation that makes our life and the life of the planet possible. So there's a great transition that is being born within the present paradigm, and that is a response to its failures and to its unfulfilled promises. So as part of that transition, one of the things that we find ourselves facing right now is fascism. And so I want to talk about that. So, but we're trying to transition to a world of communion, holism, a world that recognizes that we're all in it together and that we all depend on a complex web of mutual dependencies and co-creations that has been developed since the beginning of time and is the foundation for our lives and our existence today. Narcissism treats every polarity as a struggle for dominance of us over them. Whereas the paradigm of mutuality or wholeness or communion would be one that treats life treats every polarity as needing to provoke a dialogue or a communion between the various parts and to find the underlying unity, that is foundational to the parts. So I'm going to start with, I had a dream a couple of years ago. And it's an odd kind of a dream because I don't remember the dream. I just remember waking up with sort of the take-home message of the dream. So I wake up and the experience was, I get it. Fascism is a hatred of life. Fascism is a hatred of life. Now, I have a personal history with that. My parents barely escaped Hitler, Germany, and my father's Jewish, my mother. So I grew up in the shadow of that. But it was like, okay, fascism is the hatred of life. And then I started going like, well, that's kind of strange because it's deceptive, because fascism claims to be a celebration. That is to say, it celebrates virility and victory and fertility and vigor. And in the German, in the German case, it'll be different for different races, but in the German case, beauty and meaning blondness and athleticism and fertility. They weren't even sexually. I mean, they believed in fertility. They weren't prudish about sex, because that was the way that the German race would propagate itself. So is the claim of celebrating life, winning, victory, virility, fertility. Now, what's interesting is I say that because it's also true. Give me a second. I'm going to do one other thing with my window if I can. Okay, I'm going to pin myself, which means I'll stay, my picture will stay central, even if you talk, until we change that. So it's interesting because, I said, so the last thing they would say was they're not celebrating life. But it's also interesting because there's also, the black uniforms of the SS with the death heads. And so there's also this dark celebration of death and killing and whatever. But I think that's part of how, if you have a one-sided view of the world, then the shadow side comes out in another way. And how it comes out, though, in this way is to rain death and destruction on the other, on the enemies of the life that you think you are supporting. So seems like a celebration of life, but it's not, because life is a cycle of birth and death. Real life involves birth, ascension, decline, and death. Death is the condition of and makes birth possible. Death is what creates the fertile ground in which new things are born. So winning is only half of life. And if you hate half of life, then you hate real life. So I'd amend it to fascism is a hatred of real life. You can't love and celebrate life if you don't embrace victory and defeat, birth and death, separate individuality and connectedness and interdependency, strength and vulnerability. Both halves of that are intrinsic to life. And if you want to say you love life, then you have to love it all. One time I had experienced that with my friend Peter. We went down to the Rita Reservoir, hiked down there, and this is in the middle of the winter, sat by one of the two major feeder creeks that go into it. And we're just looking at the winter beauty. And one of the things we noticed was that in the winter beauty, much of the beauty you're looking at is dead. The trees are not green, but there's also just a lot of dead trees and moldering leaves and rotting things. And basically, the beauty that you're seeing is the beauty, essentially the beauty of death, as it is preparing the ground for, making fecund the earth for life, spring and life to happen. So the winter beauty the death part is very visible because the leaves and all that stuff are not there. In the summer, in the spring and summer, when things are green, most of what you see, maybe 3/4, I'm looking at my window now, 3/4 of what I see is all these leaves and grass and all this lush life. And the dead part that made it possible is more in the background, although I also see many rotting logs and things that have died and made this life possible. So They depend on each other. Death and life depend on each other. And if you want to say you love life, then you have to love it. That can be challenging. That is a challenge. Now, Hitler's book was called, he wrote a treatise called Triumph of the Will. I just said it in German. Des Willen, the will. Triumph of the will. And essentially for the will's victory over weakness, vulnerability, softness, empathy. The will's victory essentially over love, over the soft parts of life, you want to call it. And so what that means is celebrating the will in that way internally means that you reject in yourself, but also into others, the vulnerable aspects of yourself. And then as you reject it in yourself, then you project it onto the other. And the other is whoever you decide the others are, but it started with gypsies and then political opposition and then Jews and then homosexuals and then, whoever you want to project otherness onto, and therefore all of which are weak, are, artists are, there's a word that's not coming to me right now for degenerate, the degenerate parts of society, artists and avant-garde folks. So you project, you experience yourself as weak, clean, pure, and a victor. You project the rejected parts of yourself onto the other in various forms, and then in the form of the other, you defeat it, despise it, vanquish it, shame it, exterminate it, genocide it. So Hitler's internal narcissism was projected onto the world stage and played out on the world stage. And he was able to get enough of his nation to go along with that, to have it be a national movement that was victorious on the national scale, in the sense of being able to shut down, kill, shut down, and terrify the aspects of German society that were in opposition to these ideas. So I came away from that fascinated with the idea, for someone whose only value is triumph and victory and domination, if your only value is that you believe in triumph of domination, will, victory, how do you handle losing? You don't have any greater values. How do you handle losing? Now, we've had our mini model of that in Trump, who cannot handle losing. And so what he does is he just pretends he didn't, basically. And we're dealing with that potential tragic aspects. I mean, it's pathetic and ridiculous, but it's also potentially tragic if you can convince enough people to go along with that. Anyway, but fortunately, there's an answer to my puzzlement, and that is in a movie called Downfall. Has anyone seen that? A wonderful movie, Downfall. It has Bruno Ganz in it. Bruno Ganz is old in this movie and plays Hitler, but was a major German matinee idol, and took part in many of the best known German films, and most of the Werner Herzog films and others. Anyway, but he plays Hitler in this. But the thing is that this movie is very well documented because it's based on interviews with some young women who were in the bunker with Hitler as secretaries, and particularly one of the women. And these were not hardcore Nazis or Jew haters. They were just sort of innocent, relatively innocent young folks. but they were certainly flattered. They were flattered that the Fuhrer wanted them to be with, they could be secretaries to him, and he chose these out of a whole bunch of young women. And so they were witnesses to what went on in the bunker. And so it's a well-documented movie in that way. It's a fictional movie in a way, but it's not pretending to be a documentary, but it's very well documented and based on reality. Now, so you have to picture this. Hitler is in the bunker. You cannot be more thoroughly and completely defeated than Hitler was at this moment. He's hiding in the bunker. The Russian army is coming into town. His people, that is to say, what was left of the people of his population that he considered his people, are, well, most of them are, the men are mostly gone and dead, the men in the middle of their life. And so, but you have old people and 11-year-old kids. They're digging, his people are digging through the rubble for bits of food or scraps of anything useful. The complete rubble of Berlin, digging through it. And this is 9 years after the 1936 Nuremberg rally, where he stood in front of this amazing crowd and said, how they're going to take over the world. In uns marschiert Deutschland, vor uns marschiert Deutschland, und hinter uns marschiert. In us marches Germany, before us marches Germany, and behind us marches Germany. Just this unbelievable celebration of power, Nazi power. 9 years after that, you could not have been, 9 years after that, his 1,000-year Reich, the 1,000-year empire, was in rubble, and he's hiding in his bunker underneath. So again, you cannot be more defeated. So how does someone who cares only about victory handle that? As you can expect, he chose to make it an incredible growth experience. No. So but he decided to forego a growth experience. So the drama is this. He keeps being visited by hardened Nazi generals who are coming to him, and they're saying, please, could you surrender so that we don't have to execute 11-year-old children who found some kind of a weapon, or 80-year-old men who we can supply with some whatever weapon we can find in fighting the organized, victorious Russian army that is coming into our city. We can't stomach it anymore. The hardened Nazi general, we cannot stomach executing for desertion those people who don't take arms against the Russian army with whatever weapons they can find. Please, could you just... Anyway, so Hitler says, no, he will not surrender. He will not surrender. Ooh, what a man, right? He will not surrender. And the key thing is a conversation with Albert Speer. That was his architect who created all these incredible monuments to Nazi power, a full-blown Nazi. And so Speer says to Hitler, these are your people. Don't you have mercy on your people? They're being killed unnecessarily. They're being executed. You can't just, these are your people. And Hitler says, I thought the German people were victorious, were winners, were victors. And it turns out they were losers. They were weak and they were losers. Let them die. Now, is that not fantastic? This is Hitler. This is Hitler, the leader, saying that the German people let him down. He placed his bets on the victoriousness of the German people. They lost. They let him down. The German people let Hitler down, let him die. And there's a quote there where he says, well, it says their spirit has been defeated. What's the point of keeping their bodies alive? So his idea of what the German race represented has already been destroyed. So who cares about their bodies? Let them die. They let me down. So that's the perfect narcissist reaction, right? You project the loserness onto the people, onto even your own people, meaning, not including all the people that were destroyed because they were other. Yeah. So why does this work? Why does this work? Why don't we learn this lesson? Why does this keep happening? And I want to say that Stalinism was the same thing. It was just as bad. Stalin was, in my opinion, never a real communist, a real Marxist, if you mean by that, standing up for the rights of ordinary people and poor people and against class power or anything like that. Stalin was a thug. He flew the nearest flag around, which was, in that case, the communist flag. He killed all the real communists, a lot of whom were German Jews, executed them. And by the time they were done, I read the very good biography of him. By the time they were done, really the only value left was ruthlessness. He wanted around him the good communist, and how you were a good communist, whether you were so ruthless that you would do anything, including killing peasants. You would do anything for communism, but essentially you do anything for Stalinism. And so, bullyish and thugs, narcissism can take lots of political forms, or the ideological trappings of narcissism can be fairly hard, just historically determined, essentially. So how does this fly? And so I've talked about this before, and when we talked about the evolutionary heritage of pro-social and pro-nature instinctual parts of our instinctual apparatus, my way of summarizing that is that our instinctual heritage has left human beings with a powerful yearning to be a meaningful, empowered, and contributing and respected part of a meaningful whole, worthy of our allegiance, and ultimately sacred. I'm going to say that again. That we have a powerful yearning and desire and guidance to be, internal instinctual guidance to be a meaningful, empowered, contributing, and respected. But contributing is important, contributing, useful, and respected part of a meaningful whole that is worthy of our allegiance and ultimately sacred. And this is an adaptive heritage that is a result of our ancient and long evolutionary dialogue with nature. And the foundation, it's adaptive because it's been the foundation of us as a social animal, of us having, developing personal bounds for personal individuality and personal bonding, raising and nurturing our kids, empathy, sacrificing for the whole, being able to build a culture, and for cultural learning, for the accumulation of cultural learning. And that was adaptive, particularly from that evolution. Those evolutionary adaptations come particularly from the 99% or whatever, something like that, 99% of the time that probably more than that, the time that our species has spent as a tribal people, sort of before civilization. And so what I believe is that when those needs are met, we are healthy, happy, functional. We find our lives meaningful. And when they're not met, we are sick, we are unhealthy, we're dangerous, and we are vulnerable. Now, historically, that's particularly true. Like, so if you want to talk about, so the German people had just been defeated in a crushing war where they were subjected to an unconditional surrender and shaming, and the conditions of the surrender for the Germans after the Second World War were crushing. So that adds so the sense of national shame and disempowerment and dislocation is part of a fertile ground for that. I think it's true of the right wing aspects of the right wing. I would call it fascist aspects of the Israeli government, which is a response, a PTSD response to the healthy response that is never again, never again, which is completely healthy response, but that has been co-opted to a place where never again to us. But in the meantime, we don't care what we do to the Palestinians or to others. So now in the U.S., now if you bring that to the U.S. now, why I think we're right for fascism is that we're in the middle of a great dislocation, and that dislocation, there's a lot of ways to describe it, but I think a big part of it is that the nation state, and this we talked about this in the economic and political part, that the nation state has not been able to stand up to multinational corporate capitalism to take care of the needs of our citizens. The 99%. Some people are making out like bandits, but the basic needs of economic needs and the basic needs for involvement and for empowerment and for feeling part of things, those basic needs have crumbled with the breakdown of the social contract with the majority of the American population. So we're in a great dislocation that involves a loss of standing, of position, of status, of respect, of material security, of employment, and the conditions of economic survival. Just a really simple example. If you teach in the San Francisco schools, you can't afford to live there. So we're not just talking about fringes. I mean, the basic middle class is struggling. So when those are in a great dislocation and those basic needs are not met, you're very vulnerable to faux empowerment and faux belonging, fake empowerment and fake belonging. And fascism offers that. Fascism offers fake empowerment and fake belonging. And that is, so I want to talk about that now. So one, it offers fake empowerment. And that empowerment is essentially to identify with a great leader, with a sort of cartoonish image of power and leadership. And you get to identify with that and bask in its glory and imagine that it represents you and is fighting for you and standing up for you against the forces that oppose you. So you get to bask in the glory of an unaccountable bully, basically. I think that's actually part of the appeal of it for people who haven't experienced what a genuine empowerment would be. I'm remembering an interview with a guy, and they said, well, what do you think about the fact that Trump just said that, he can grab the pussy of any woman he wants because he's so, whatever, so powerful. so famous. And the guy said, well, yeah, who wouldn't? So it is essentially, so the repressed part, it was essentially saying, yeah, I'd like to be like that. I like to be able to do whatever I want and not be accountable for what I do. So that's the attraction of a kind of empowerment that's not a responsible empowerment. I'll talk a little more about what that means. But I think part of the appeal, and now finally I can be a racist. Finally, I can say what I really think about gay people or whatever. I don't have to, what's the word? I don't have to be politically correct in what I say. I'm tired of that. So part of the problem is that society does not offer a healthy empowerment, a model of healthy empowerment. And it doesn't involve the idea of leadership, that it would be, what some people call servant leader, to be a servant leader, to be a leader whose job is to listen to, care about, and serve the needs of the people that they're leading. A leader who considers the needs of the populace, who considers the needs of the whole, who's respectful of the others, and who's accountable. So we don't have a model of leadership that offers what we've been developing as an idea of belonging, where belonging means both to truly express and manifest our best selves, to fully blossom ourselves, not to sacrifice ourselves, to be fully ourselves, and to be respectful and grateful, respectful of others and grateful for our enmeshment in the great web of mutuality that makes our life possible. So basking in the glory of the leader is faux empowerment for a number of reasons, but the biggest ones are that it's completely conditional on loyalty to the leader. So in Nazi Germany, you could be seen at the fringes of a Nazi rally and not looking enthusiastic and be arrested and never heard from again. So it's not empowerment, because the price is a loyalty oath, and that is so everyone is on fragile, thin ice to keep proving their empowerment, to keep proving their loyalty in order to get to bask and in exchange for that, you get to bask in the glory of the leader. And so it's revocable at a moment's notice. And a beautiful example of that is Pence. Can you imagine Pence? Someone loyaler than that. And as soon as you cross the leader in any way, you're out. So it's not empowerment, obviously. So false empowerment. And the other part is false belonging, so faux belonging. And it's not true belonging, because it's not belonging to something that's worthy of our allegiance, because it serves no greater good than the power and glory of the leader. It's not a belonging to a general welfare, to society as a whole, to the needs of society as a whole, or of the world, or of nature. There's nothing greater. It's not a belonging to anything greater than the followership of the leader, or maybe the nation, or maybe the race. But it's not a belonging to a greater whole, and therefore it's not belonging to something worthy of our allegiance. And it substitutes the trappings of the sacred, like a flag and a red hat or whatever else, for allegiance, for gratitude and connection to anything truly spiritual. So next piece, I want to talk a little bit about the human brain and how it works and how that reflects onto this, but this might be a good moment for anybody who wants to say something or ask something. Anybody who has no idea what the fuck I'm talking about?
No, we know very well what you're talking about.
I think
And
we understand
we,
We're
far
all
too
living in
well.
the same world. I'm glad to hear that.
I
we are
mean,
living there.
I think Trump and what he's doing and who's behind him certainly fits very well.
And I don't even know if I said, I think I didn't say this part, right? So Goebbels, who invented the big lie, right? The whole thing was, well, I guess I'll say more about it in a minute, but it's basically that if you divide people up and have them all against each other and all fighting each other, then of course, and scapegoating different groups for what's not working, that's obviously in the interest of whatever entrenched power and privilege system is, because it prevents unity among the people that you're trying to control. All right. So I may do, in past classes, I've done a much longer thing on the human brain and how it functions, but I'm going to do an abbreviated version of it here, and then we'll see whether we want to do more. But in this context, so there's one way of, this is a very complicated issue, but a usefully simplistic way of, I think, usefully simplistic way of looking at it is what you've probably heard of this, the tripart brain, which essentially says that our brain consists of three systems, and that those systems have evolved over time, and they are so the oldest system. And there's a cool way of doing it, which is there's a fist model of it. So in the fist model of it, this is the brain stem. It's the oldest part of the brain. It's something we share with the alligators and crocodiles. And it's the place where our basic regulation of our body mostly resides. And it's the place where this is the brainstem, and where our basic survival instincts all live, including our fight or flight response. Then the next stage, the next more younger stage, is the limbic system. That's my thumb here. And that's the system that includes our emotional life. And it's the mammalian system largely. And you notice that mammals nurture their young, raise their young. Mammals have loving bonds. And the strong affiliative system and love, nurturance, sacrifice for the young and for others, and also the herding and flocking. So just being part of a larger group. And then the last and youngest part is the cortex, the neocortex, of which the prefrontal cortex is the latest part. So oldest is our reptilian survival instincts. Next is our emotional mammalian, and that's sort of wrapped in the newest part. And the newest part, the cortex, is the part of us that plans, but it's also the part of us who's responsible for integrating the whole. It's the executive function. And that executive function can be dissociated and misused in a bad way. That is to say, just having an ideology that overrides the needs of the physical, of the body, and of the heart, if you want to call it that, the body and the emotional stuff. But its highest function is right up here, and that's the prefrontal cortex, and particularly the central prefrontal cortex. And that is the part that has the integrated function. That's the part that's responsible for integrating the whole of our functioning. Now, in the narcissistic system, there is a tendency to privilege our newest toy, right? This is our newest toy. This is what makes us separate and different from other mammals. So to preferences and to say, well, that part of the brain should be running the show. And so you have a hierarchical system where that part of the brain tells the rest of it what to do, and you train your emotions and you train your body to do what your calculating mind has told you to do. Now that can lead to horrible disasters, including the best example to me is Eichmann, who said, I never hated any Jews, but I was told, my bosses told me to kill the Jews. And so my job was to do it in the most efficient way and not let my feelings or my bodily sensations get in the way. So that would be a detached executive function. But a healthy executive function would be more like a servant leader who connects, respects, and is accountable and responsible for the whole. So if you take that inside, we have been somewhat trained. So we've been, civilized humans have been somewhat trained in the narcissistic system to let our mind run everything else, to privilege it. And then the mind is what's most accessible then to ideology and to being used to support the power of others. Particularly the mind, when those enormous abilities that we have, mental abilities we have, are not in service of the heart and the body, when you don't have a healthy whole relationship. So health is to love the whole self. And when the PFC's highest function, integrated functions as a servant leader, you have a healthy relationship. And that's like having, as opposed to your your cortex operating as a narcissistic leader who's just using the rest of the body for its own purposes. One example, the way of looking at it in a different class, I talked about, you could call it the rider and the horse. And I was saying, a good rider doesn't just use the horse for its own needs and say, we're doing this. The good rider takes care of his horse, waters it, feeds it, and also listens to it, because a good rider knows that the horse knows things that it doesn't. It smells things it doesn't. It sees things it doesn't. It knows what's good footing and what isn't and doesn't. And in a good relationship, the rider takes it seriously. If the horse says, no, I don't want to go there. Maybe the horse knows there's a cougar there that the rider doesn't. And so when I mentioned that, one of the people in the class said, she does equestrian work with kids, with traumatized kids. And she said, so the goal is essentially to be a centaur, where the rider becomes and the horse are one, where the rider isn't sitting on the horse, but a really excellent rider is more like a centaur. So now the world is dangerous, scary, and will ultimately dissolve us. The world is nurturing, generous, and a miracle that makes our existence possible. And we have the two systems, basically, again, very simplified, but two systems in our brain and in our psyche to deal with both aspects of reality. One is the dangerous part is that we have an alarm system, which is our fight or flight, and whose job is to notice danger, to experience fear, and to override everything else when it needs to. One of the things about that alarm system is, it says, I don't care what else is going on, duck now. So it has to override everything else. I've always pictured, I hear a sound, gee, that could be a gunshot. For all I know, that's aimed at me. That could be a bullet going towards me right now. I think I'll duck, right? So, the alarm system says duck, and we'll figure out the rest later. So it needs to, in an emergency, override thinking about, well, gee, if I died, that would really be terrible, because what would my wife and my children do without me? Duck. Okay. So, but PTSD is when you are on your alarm system ongoingly, when it's on automatic, and when you are operating in alarm and on alarm when you're no longer in an emergency crisis, and that system is no longer appropriate and useful, because it's not calibrated enough to, it's not able to calibrate it enough to adjust it to whatever the real situation in your life is. So that's the horror of PTSD, is to constantly experience yourself in terrifying danger, or to unexpectedly be triggered into feeling that way because a car exhaust exploded. Now, Goebbels, architect of the big lie, that was the point, is to mobilize fear, to keep people in constant fear, because if they are in fear, they are easily manipulatable, and you can set them against each other and keep yourself in power. Now, the other major system is essentially a system that is appropriate to the fact that nature is nurturing and makes life possible, and that we are part of it and in communion with it. And that's, so I'm going to call that the, whatever I wrote here, let's call it the nurturing system, or the system of attachment, of nurture, of association, of social connections, of communion, all the mammalian things that we were talking about. And you can call that love. And in that, like in the fear system, there are stress hormones that flood the body and that are communicating to the body, get ready to fight, or to run, or to freeze, or whatever is, looks like it might allow you to survive this moment. The nurturing system functions on reward, is a reward system, and functions on dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, and things that make you feel good and connected with others and with the world. Now, both of those are necessary, right? And that's back to having a not naive idea of what belonging means. Belonging means to take care of oneself and to participate in the whole. And we need both. And we need both. We need both in these times, because we are in a time of crisis, and the alarm system has a proper use, which is to motivate action. So it may also be useful at times to be in denial, so that you can go to a movie and hug your grandchild and do whatever feeds your life. But ultimately, you need a relationship of to be in reality, and that means to be aware that we are in a crisis, and to have that available to motivate actions, which is the response you need to do, not just for the use of the world, but just for your own equilibrium. When there's a crisis, your system, your body, your psyche wants to take some form of action, and taking some form of action, even a modest form of action, is actually part of stabilizing yourself into a healthy relationship to the difficulties and crises you're aware of. So that's one. And at the same time, so we need both. We need that, and we need to celebrate life with gratitude and joy, and to receive its resources and its sustenance and its nurturance. And one of the ways I learned that for myself was there were times in the 60s movement. I was always in a branch of the 60s movement that did care about, that wasn't just dogmatic old dogmatic communism, but that was also interested in a cultural revolution and in having different relationships with each other and having different relationships between men and women and between race. So I was always in the part of the movement that cared about that, but there was always still a tendency in the movement to say it's about a struggle. It's not about, it's about a struggle, and it's about us bringing up the energy that it takes to struggle and make the change that has to happen. And it doesn't all have to feel good. We're doing it because it needs to happen. And I think at the points when we lost the fact that being in the struggle needs to be nurturing and joyful and fulfilling on the personal level, and that doing social change and growing as a person in ourselves and in our relationship to ourselves and to others, that's one thing, then that's when the movement was in its healthiest places. And those aspects of the movement who thought of it as self-sacrifice in the name of a greater good are the ones that led to the failures of the old left part of our movement, the dogmatic Stalinists, and to the weathermen who ultimately said, we're going to sacrifice ourselves because we're white and privileged in the service of needs of Black people who are at war. Black people are at war, and we're cowards if we don't fight on their side. Now, most Black people didn't think they were at war. The Black leadership and the Panthers and those people didn't seek a military confrontation with the U.S. government, but a bunch of privileged white people deep in their white guilt felt they should sacrifice themselves and were furious at those whites who didn't agree with them and called them racist because they didn't follow these guys' idea of what Black people supposedly want. So I think the greatest harm that movements do is when they forget that they're fighting, that everyone is fighting for themselves as well as the world, that they're participants, they're part of the group of people who they are fighting for. So, and that's why I've emphasized, and that's what some of the exercises we do are about, is how do we fight for what if we're fighting for the planet, how do we fight from a place where we are resourced by it and expressing all that power, that we're not back to the will, we're not manufacturing the power to fight from our will, but we are resourced by and become expressions of nature's effort to heal itself and create a healthy world. So this would be a time we could have a discussion of how do we do this? How do we balance? How do we neither in denial nor despair and accept the gifts of what we're fighting for and live in fullness and joy? That's quite a thing. So I'm happy to have a discussion of that if people are interested. What do we do to keep ourselves? I mean, we don't want to waste having this beautiful, just look outside, this beautiful opportunity to be part of the world and part of life. We want to receive that gift with gratitude and use it fully, and yet we want to be part of the solution if we can figure out how to do that. So any hints on how either of you, any of us does this?
I suppose one of the things is we take time to get outside to enjoy it, or where we can look from inside out. For me, I try to get out because I need the exercise. But in getting out, I get to see what's out there.
Yeah.
I've been watching a program on YouTube that was we were told about it in the class, Capitalism, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and it's called The Century of the Self, and it's about 6 hours long, I think, and I've gotten halfway through it. It ties the ideas of Freud and how they were co-opted by the capitalist corporations, and how we are still in, well, to me, I mean, I haven't gotten to the modern day part of it, but this is the way we are still being manipulated. And I don't have a conclusion on it, except that it really made me look even deeper at my own ideas and the things that I think that I have learned and developed into, and how much of that has been fed to me or forced upon me, or also that I have developed in reaction to things that have been fed and forced that I don't respond well to. So it's been reaction, and it's causing me to really question my mind, which I thought I was doing very well with, very seriously. And I started this group, we're calling it the Solutions Group. We're 7 people in it now. Only 4 of us have been active lately. We meet twice a month. And really, I've been using it. I've been going through different stages with it, about what can we do? How do we work with this? Part of it is as I said before, I'm looking for the keys. The key, what needs to change that is a key? Where are we stuck? What can we undo or do or open up to get things to move in a new direction? And I'm also in looking at, I mean, there's one person in the class who's absolutely probably the best activist anywhere that I've ever met in the whole world, I mean, just totally dedicated. And that's not me. But I'm totally dedicated, but I'm not outwardly active with it. And so each person in the group, there are 4 of us, but that are active, and each one is very, very different, and each one is very dedicated, and we're concerned, we're feeling the same concerns, and our approaches come out of who we each are, and it's really different. Each one is very different, and it feels alive. It feels very alive, like there is something to be discovered here, to be developed. There's something is growing, something is developing. Clarity or some kind of understanding is coming, and there is movement. We're not the same as we were in our first meetings. It's definitely, there's growth.
Fantastic.
So I don't have any answers to your question.
Yeah.
I'm in the midst of the question myself. Like when you said you were going to talk about the brain and how it works, I was hoping there would be something more positive in there. So
Oh, it's not
anyway,
positive? I think it's positive.
well, it's so easy to think that you are going in a positive direction. It's easy to think that aha, this is good. And like you did say about the connecting the mind and the heart, and I think that's what I've always called wisdom, is the heart wisdom. And I think that is essential. So I personally, I'm looking for inner knowing, and which is what I would call heart wisdom. I think when you know something's right, that there's no question. It isn't something that, oh, I think this would be a good thing. It's, I know it. And it comes from who I truly am, even if I couldn't tell you who I truly am. But it's more true than anything else that,
Yes.
I mean, any words like I'm blabbering now
You're
are,
not
that
blabbering.
is not the, that's not the essence. It's when the knowing comes through, and that takes action. Like, I mean, I started the group, which was, I mean, I don't even know why or how it happened, but I just did it. And I am doing things now, as I've said before, here in the mobile home park where I live with the elderly. We're all elderly. I like to think they're elderly, but I'm elderly. And it's, there are things that I think about and I notice it, but then there are the times where I'm just in action and I'm doing something because it comes through me. Somehow my inner nature is coming through.
So that's fantastic. That's just, and it's very articulate actually for something that's hard to talk about. But that experience of, yeah, heart of that experience of clarity that has to do with it, that it's your heart and your mind coming together and knowing something, you know, in a way that's deeply experiential and deeply personal, and not just someone's idea, you know, and the experience of personhood that comes with that, and clarity. I mean, that's fantastic. And so if everyone had that, we wouldn't have cults, and we wouldn't have fascism, and we wouldn't have Trump followers or whatever else. So that's, I mean, to me, that's a powerful statement of why that aspect of making social change is really important, and why, and you're saying that that leads to action spontaneously in some way, you know, that action, that's actionable, and it's actionable because it's deep and personal and real. So that's fantastic that you're doing that. But I'm going to shift soon to a little exercise because we got 10 minutes left. But yeah, that's powerful. So I think that's the experience of the, as you said it, heart, mind, and body coming together in a wholeness that's palpable and experienced. And yeah, I think that's about all the most we can hope for. Well, it's okay if we shift to a meditation or exercise or whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
So, again, my motivation in these is to find the place where we are where we experience our being resourced by and supported by, and having in us the internal guidance of nature, and where we get to be expressions and manifestations of nature, incarnations of life, and so that we experience our connectedness, and that if we're fighting and defending and standing up for life and nature, we're not, that's not coming from us. We do that by being essentially expressions of it. And if we find that, then the energy and power of nature is running through us. And it fits in with me for the fact that we as humans are not responsible for solving it. And that whether the human experiment was a good idea or a bad idea is way above our pay grade. Nature decided to try out experiencing itself in part through the human incarnation, as well as infinite other incarnations, from trees to slime molds to birds to eagles to buffalo. So our job is just, if we can be our best version of humanity that's available to us, make the best use of the genetic, physical, and psychological heritage nature has embodied in us, we can make use of that. Nature may find us one of many useful aspects of itself to use in its self-healing process. And that's basically what we can hope for. So I'm going to start by looking at the forest that I showed you outside my window here. And why don't you look at whatever you chose to represent some beauty that you have a heart connection with. And open yourself to it and let it see what it awakens in you when you feel your connection with it. What does it feel like in your body? What awakens in your body? And as you make yourself transparent to that beauty and that energy and that wholeness and that whole song of the world, as you make yourself transparent to it, let it fill you. And notice that you are in an intimate relationship of exchange with it, that you are a participant with it. And one of the simplest way to notice it is to notice that when you breathe in, your life is nurtured by the existence of the air, and your life is nurtured by the CO2, by the oxygen that the trees have offered you and put out. And that when you breathe out, you are breathing out the CO2 that the trees need to do their breathing and their living. And as you let yourself resonate with the life outside you, this might be a time to close your eyes if you want, and let yourself feel all of the life that is in you. All of the life processes that are at work in you that make it unmistakable to you that you are a living organism and not a marble statue of yourself. Sensations that only you have a unique access to because they are your life and your existence in your body in this moment. And you may experience that as all through your whole body, as a raging, powerful wind that's in your whole body. You may experience it in one corner of your body. You may experience it as an ache or pain in some part of your body. It may be a quiet little voice, little sensation like a spring or a blade of grass in the desert that takes your exquisite attention to notice it. And notice how by offering your loving attention, your respectful and loving attention to the sensations in your body and to life as it's happening in your body, that those sensations may change for you. And nature lives within you as it does without you. There's a campfire burning in the mitochondria of every cell in your body. Every campsite is nurtured and fed by the rivers and oceans and streams and trickles and rivulets that bring needed nutrients to the campfire and that take away what the campfire needs to have taken away. Every corner of your body is reached and touched by a vast network, an infinitely vast network of nerve cells, each of which is reaching for each other, each of which reaching to each other to create a vast web that feeds and nourishes and sends messages from every part of your body to another, to every other part. There are storms of hormones that sweep through your body and send messages to every corner of your living being. There are viruses and bacteria, an infinite number of organisms that your body hosts and that make your life possible and that are in deep partnership with your body, that are actually extensions and connections of your body to other living things. And in the background, there's the constant drumbeat, like a drum in the jungle, of your heart pounding. And that has done so for every moment that you have been alive on this planet, and will for every moment that you are alive on this planet. So let yourself sit and experience the livingness inside you and see how it is watered by you offering it your attention. And when you are ready, slowly, starting with a soft focus, slowly open your eyes and look at the piece of beauty in your life that you chose. And notice how your experience of it is enhanced by and your reverberation with it is enhanced by your connection to your own living being. Notice how the livingness inside you and the livingness outside you are in an exquisitely and tender mutual relationship. And in doing so, you may experience the depth of your belonging in this world and to life. And as you have experienced witnessing with your wholeness the beauty of life outside you, you might want to spread your arms, open your chest a little bit, and let the world outside you witness you. Notice that just as you witness existence, existence witnesses and acknowledges you. And that that's part of your intimate relationship of belonging in and with the world. And if you want to, if there's any movement, either slight or large, or palpable or not palpable, if any movement that your body wants to make in response to that, as you make that movement and offer it to the world. And if you want, you can let the impulse for the movement sit there and not immediately answer it to the point where it's almost hard not to do it. So you notice how much that movement impulse comes from what life wants to do through your body, not some idea you have, but how much that movement just wants to happen from a place much deeper than your will. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes if they're still closed. Like I said, they wouldn't be, but slowly come present and rejoin the fine folks that you're in this Zoom room with. And you may not want to share verbally anything about your experience, but if you do, I'm interested. We're probably all interested. Hmm. We're running a little over, which is not a problem for me at all, unless someone has another class they need to get to or something.
I'm afraid I need to leave. I've got some other agendas I've got to get to. But it's been a good class,
Thank you.
so I'll look for
Even
everybody.
better, even better than the upcoming root canal, or?
Well, the root canal has happened, so
Oh,
now
it's
I have to
happened.
live with it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sorry.
it happened. It happened Tuesday morning. So
Oh, I
now
see.
I'm eating on the left side and dealing with
Oh.
the nerves up here. So yes, better than the root canal.
All right.
We'll
Well,
see everybody
go
next
in
week.
peace.
Hope everyone has a good week. Thank you.
Thank you so
You
much.
too.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
coming. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
I will. I'm going to sign off too. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.